This is the beginning of podcast number 10 about chapter 15 on relationships. This is the last movement concept of the three categories. Again, as we saw in the first two movement concepts, the movement analysis framework or wheel for relationship concepts shows the purple part of the wheel here as being relationships. Again, the other parts, and particularly the circles on the inside of relationships, are the skill themes. The outside parts are the movement concepts. Again, the outside circle, outermost circle, is relationships and how they're defined. The components are right in the next second circle, right underneath relationships, and those are the components are with people, with objects, and with body parts. For each of those components, then they are defined by how the body moves with body parts, wide, narrow, and so on. With people, with a group by yourself, with groups of other people and partners and groups of three and so on, and with objects such as implements like long-handled implements, rackets, short-handled implements or rackets, balls, bean bags, scarves, and so on. The movement concept of relationships, which is fairly easy for young children to get to know, refers to with whom or with what the body moves. This is what the last lessons of our lessons will be concentrating on is relationships. It addresses three aspects: the relations of body parts, in other words, the relationship of one body part to another, how you form balances and shapes, how you travel on a variety of body parts or balance on different body parts, matching parts, and so on. The second aspect is relationships with people. Sometimes it might be the hardest one, but on sports teams it is very difficult to manipulate a ball or an implement while you're having to worry about other people on your team and a defense. So you always want to first start kids working alone by themselves with an implement or a ball or whatever, and then put them into partners and then put them into groups when they're older. The relationships with objects and or people again means that you can travel over, under, around, through, maybe benches or hoops or again people, along, close to, far away. Those are all parts of academic language. They're also phrases that are prepositions. So always think about relationships are having to do with prepositions. This slide shows all of the definitions of each of the components. Relationships of body parts might be rounded, narrow, wide, twisted, symmetrical, and non-symmetrical. And those things you can talk to a pre-K or kindergarten child about, because you can talk about one side of the body looks like the other side, exactly like there's a mirror going between them. And when they don't look alike, they're non-symmetrical, like this picture on this slide. Relationships with people are leading, following, mirror, matching, in unison or in contrast, groups, partners, solo, and so on. Relationships with objects or people means between groups, over, under, on, off, near, far, in front, behind. And again, all of those are prepositions there. Alone in a mass, meeting, parting, surrounding, around, alongside. Let me go back to alone in a mass. In other words, there might be a person in the middle of a circle with a mass of people around them. You always want to begin teaching with self-relationships and objects in relation to a body. And try to think about what sports have objects in relation to the body, which is most sports actually that we do. And why is it important for them to understand an object far away from their body and an object close to their body? As I just said, when you're teaching relationships, you always want to begin with the simplest concept for children to understand, which is self-relationships, or body parts and body shapes. Once they've got the idea about body parts, then you can shift the emphasis to relationships with different objects and or with other people. On this slide, the picture on the left is a self relationship with another object. In other words, he only has to worry about one person himself and an object. And then on the right hand side, there are relationships with other people, and those two girls there are obviously trying to mirror each other's movements. Again, in this first bullet here, you want them to develop an understanding of the vocabulary such as near, far, in front, behind, and alongside. That's representative of academic language, which we will talk about very soon, about including that in all of your lessons. It's also usually combined with a study of other concepts and skills, including concepts of, as we just said a minute ago, alone in a math, solar, partners, groups, and between groups. Tasks should be presented to children in a progressive way. You always want to start with being alone by yourself, working in self-space, then add a partner, and so on. As in everything else in teaching, this is called a progression. As mentioned in the other chapters on movement concepts, the goal is the functional understanding of what it means, what each of these words means, the vocabulary, and how that is translated into movement. So you always want to start with the movement concept first and then go to the skill theme. When combining the relationship or the concept with a skill, it's important to first observe the demonstration of their understanding of the concept, not the skill performance. Then, after they understand the concept of the relationships, then start worrying about what they're doing with the skills that they're practicing. One of the problems that we have with relationships and games is that a child needs to be at the control level of skill before being introduced to the concept of relationships with objects during the game context. We're going to try to get them to move toward the control level, even if they haven't been there before. Some of them may be at the pre-control level at the pre-K or kindergarten level, and we're going to try to move them to the control level through working on the space awareness. Then we'll try to get them to understand about relationships. The child should have developed a skill well enough to successfully work with a partner or in small groups before introducing relationships with others. So in other words, they need to have some proficiency at skill before you start teaching relationships. That is the end of podcast number 10 on chapter 15, relationships, and that ends the 3 chapters on movement concepts. These movement concepts you need to study these podcasts for quiz number 3, which is this Friday from 6 o'clock a.m. until 11:59 p.m. You also need to read the chapters on space awareness, effort, and relationships before you take the quiz.